All right, got a big episode today. We're talking about our 5 most anticipated backlog games. Matthew, you and I both have this crazy backlog,
Yep,
hundreds, thousands of games.
pretty much.
Which ones are we going to get to? So we made a list, 2 lists actually, and we're going to go through them today. What were our rules for making these lists?
So for this backlog breakdown, this is our kind of start of the year, hold ourselves accountable. 5 games that we plan to knock off on the list, just so we have some kind of roadmap. It's a loose roadmap. We have no necessary order in which we're going to get to these. Some other games that we don't talk about might sneak in between. But for today, we thought let's try to vary up a list of 5 games in 5 somewhat different genres that we're going to play. We're not counting the Pixel remasters. We already plan to play through the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters as well as the rest of the mainline Final Fantasy series for our little sub-series on the Nintendo Watcher Pod. As a result, we nixed those. Needs to be playable on Nintendo hardware in some capacity. Now that can be old hardware, it could be the Switch, but it has to be accessible, right, on Nintendo hardware nowadays. Like, you can get a hold of it if you have the system or access to it. And as I said already, but we'll repeat, no repeat genres, right? No repeat genres. So we're trying our best to stay away from just listing off 5 JRPGs that we want to play, because we know that that's what you're expecting. And so the slight exception to that rule is different distinct subgenres are okay. Now, we tried to still be pretty choosy when it came to that. We tried not to do too many of those. But for example, in the JRPG field, you can pick a turn-based strategy RPG and an action RPG. They play differently enough
Very
that
different.
we decided that was an okay overlap. Something like that is okay. But you couldn't do a turn-based, just a straight turn-based like a Final Fantasy, 1 through 9, 10, I guess, and an action RPG. That was
Yeah,
too close together.
you actually vetoed one of my picks.
I did. You had 2 on the list that I said, no, too similar. You can't have them. So we cut some stuff.
The other thing that I just want to make sure, we didn't talk about this, but I think another rule, we haven't played any of these games on the list, right? These are all
Correct.
brand new games for us.
Yes. Games that we have not really dipped more than maybe a toe in. Now, we may have booted it up once in the past. We may have done a little bit of tutorial, but we never really got anywhere past, say, the tutorial of the game. That's kind of the big rule for this as well. So that's kind of the ground rules, trying to knock out 5 games this year, and we tried to do it with a variety of genres to give you some interesting looks at what it is we're excited to play this year, and maybe give you some ideas for games to knock off your own backlog in 2023. So we're not going to waste a lot of time. We're going to get right into this, and we'll start with my first pick, which is a game I talked about on the Bitbloggist podcast last week. If you haven't heard that episode, check out Bitbloggist podcast on wherever you catch your pods. We talked with the lovely Jake over there about games that we're excited for in 2023, and it came up that I am currently working my way through. So I guess my first backlog game, and one that I have just started, is Okami HD. Classic Zelda-like from the PS2 and Wii era. It is a Capcom game, and it stars a wolf, right, named Amaterasu, who is the god of the sun in Japanese mythology, I believe. You play as this wolf attempting to restore I guess, color in some ways, life to a dying world. You wake up after, a couple hundred years or so of sleep, are thrown right into the thick of things, and your job is to recover 13 celestial brush techniques in order to repaint the world and bring stability back to it.
This was
It's a
a
really cool
big
game.
game for the PS2, right? I vaguely remember it, never played it, but I remember that art style,
Yeah.
that watercolor kind of aesthetic. I think I'm
Yeah.
remembering the right one.
Yeah, you
It
were.
was huge. Everybody was playing it except me and you, apparently.
Yeah. It was big. I mean, people loved it a lot. They thought it was, a pretty classic Zelda-like, the brush strokes, the different brush strokes that you learn replacing, Link's traditional item collection. There's, similar dungeon styles, big open fields to run through. In some ways, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Twilight Princess, playing as Wolf Link. But if Wolf Link controlled a lot better and looked really, really stylish in that really cool watercolor, aesthetic. I actually owned this game on the PlayStation 2, and I started it up, played through maybe the first hour, and then because it came out at the end of the PlayStation 2's life cycle, I never got a chance to finish it. So I bounced off of it, never picked it back up, and that was it, right? That was the end of it for me. So I decided this time, I'm gonna get through it. I'm gonna complete this game. I've wanted to play it for a long time. I've been itching for a Zelda game for a while, and I've got a couple Zelda games that are on my list as well. But I wanted to do something else that had a similar vibe before jumping into more Zeldas, which I plan to play through whatever Zeldas I haven't completed before Tears of the Kingdom. So I'm saving that for later in the year. For now, Okami HD. I'm about an hour and 30 minutes into it at this point, maybe 2 hours. And what's interesting is that, or I should say, maybe frustrating, is that the beginning hour of that game is incredibly slow. I did not remember this being the case. It does not put its best foot forward. The first maybe hour 15 or so is a bit of a slog, and then suddenly you break out into the big open field, a la Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time or something like that, and the game kind of just opens up, and it's starting to look a lot more exciting at this point. But I'm curious to see how well I play, how well I do this, if I get through it, quickly, or if it's one that takes me a little bit longer because I'm, distracted by other things that are coming out in the meantime. But for now, I'm excited about it. I've heard really good things about the way it kind of goes, progresses, that there's kind of like three different games built into one, like three different story arcs that are all really interesting. And I've also got Okami in for the 3DS, sitting on my backlog from a long time ago. So if I like the first one, there we go. Play the sequel on the 3DS a little bit later this year. So that's pick number one for me, Okami HD. Did you ever play this game? You had not, right? You said you
No,
hadn't.
but I remember it. I remember it so vividly.
Mm-hmm.
None of my friends played it, but I remember seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
It was in the magazines. It was on G4. It was
Yeah.
everywhere for a while, and it was just because the art style was so striking.
Mm-hmm.
I never played it though, but I have thought about it
Yeah.
like recently. But I don't know if it's too late. It's on Switch now, right?
Yeah, it goes on sale a lot. You can get it on the Switch eShop usually for like $10 when it goes on sale. So Capcom games as they do. So yeah, I'll report back in a couple of weeks once I've played some more hours in it. But so far, besides the opening tedium, it looks promising. So we'll see.
Nice.
What about you, Justin? What is your first game that one of the first games that you're thinking about getting off the backlog?
Came out, I think, summer or maybe early fall last
Hmm.
year. It's a game called
Okay, recent.
Arcade Paradise. So it's a pretty recent game. I don't know. Are you
Mhm.
familiar with this one? Do you remember
I've
this
seen
one?
it. I've seen some screenshots of it. But I haven't played it or anything.
So it's basically based on an late 80s, early 90s arcade. And it's a simulation. So Matthew, you
Mhm.
and I grew up in that really late arcade heyday.
Yeah.
We were there whenever arcades were still a big thing, but we didn't really catch the height of arcade
Right.
fever in the early to mid 80s. Arcade Paradise is designed to capture that time that we were playing games. It's got, a lot of the late 80s, early 90s retro feel, that
Hmm.
synth wave aesthetic is sort of like, I looked at it and I thought, oh, Miami Vice. Like it just feels
Nice.
like Miami Vice, but in a video game.
Hmm.
But basically, the game is a simulator where you start off working in a laundromat. It's your
Okay.
laundromat. As far as I understand, it's your laundromat, and you earn money. And as you earn money, you turn your laundromat into this arcade. You
That's pretty
buy
cool.
different arcade machines. You decorate the place, and I think there are like something like 35 different arcade machines, and they're all fully playable. So
Oh, that's
as you're
cool.
building out your arcade, you can physically, well, not physically, digitally, physically play these games. So it's the arcade sim, plus you've got these really fun arcade games that are reminiscent of licensed,
Yeah.
normal arcade games. It's got a lot of attitude. The just aesthetic is awesome, and I like
Uh-huh.
these sort of life sim games. It's a good break for me from. We've talked about it earlier, but like all of the RPG stuff that we play, these kinds of
Yeah.
games are a good game for me to bounce on and bounce off because they don't really require you to remember what you were doing. They don't
Mhm.
require hours and hours of grinding. It's just going through motions, e- exploring different things. For this game, it's exploring these different games and just sort of making this arcade what you want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks really cool. I mean, I like the idea of the fact that you're building an arcade out of a laundromat. That's pretty. I actually remember growing up when my dad was like living in apartments and stuff, spending hours, in fact, on the weekend at the local laundromat feeding quarters into arcade machines. This is actually an experience that I do recall from my childhood. So, been there, done that, and it. I do like the look of all the different arcade games that appear to be available in this. They've got some really cool looking things in there. Seems really awesome. I'm excited to hear kind of more about your thoughts afterwards because I could see, the sim aesthetic being a little bit basic,
Yeah.
but the arcade, simulator that comes out of it feeling like a really fun way to do like, like Atari and Namco and all of these have been doing their like museum collections and stuff, right? Throwing all these collections
Hmm.
of old games. It's kind of cool to be able to build one of those in an art, in an old laundromat, converting it into arcade over time. Seems pretty cool.
Yeah, it's on Switch. There was a limited physical release. I think
Nice.
Limited Run did it, or maybe it was Super Rare. I
Probably.
think it was Limited Run, but it's about $20 physically. So
Hmm.
if you can catch it, on sale digitally, pick it up. It's a
It's
good
cool.
deal.
It's cool. Right on. So that brings us to my second pick, right? And this is actually a visual novel. I haven't played a visual novel in a bit. It's been a while since I played my last like full visual novel. And I'm talking, when I say visual novel here, I'm talking about a big, sprawling, book length narrative that has very little interactivity. And the game that I'm talking about is The House in Fata Morgana, which is apparently a very large, very long visual novel that I've heard really good things about. It's got an interesting looking aesthetic. It is I guess, a narrative in which you are a ghost or specter or spirit or something that comes back, to the corporeal plane for a bit, has amnesia and needs to work through, the mystery of this house over the centuries, over the decades. So you kind of travel through time and look at the house and the events that played out there over a variety of centuries and all the inhabitants and the stuff that happened there and uncover your memories as you go. It, from what I have heard, is one of the better video game narratives out there.
Mm.
It has, like I said, almost no interactivity, which to me, there's always a place in my gaming time for narrative heavy, you know, low input video gaming. I like having some sort of visual novel or visual novel esque game in my rotation that I can throw on for 30 minutes to an hour before bed just to kind of play and wind down at the end of the night. This seems like the perfect kind of wind down game. Last year I did, for a couple months there. I was playing through some of the old Ace Attorney games, the Phoenix Wright
Yeah.
games. Those were kind of my chill down, evening games, and this seems like the perfect speed for that this year. So I'm hoping to throw that into the rotation sometime soon. Use it as just kind of like a an hour here, hour there at night, and see how long it takes to get through it without rushing
Is that on
myself.
Switch?
It is, yeah,
So
yes,
the Switch for me has been great for visual novels, the Switch and the Steam
mhm,
Deck, because so much reading. We're both old now. Like I can't look
yes,
at a TV that's 12, 15 feet away and read panel after panel after panel of text. But on handheld, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And I've been getting through a lot of visual novels just because I can have it, like you said, like before bed, whip through an hour and a half, and then
Mhm.
I'm out. It's I think the Switch really makes for a great console for these kinds of games.
Yeah, yeah, and there's some cool peripherals out there too. If you're the kind of person who likes to read in bed before, I know there's some really cool like swing arms and stuff that hold the Switch for you and make a game like this really cool. You can have the you know Joy-Con in one hand, the screen kind of hovering up in front of you, just kind of click through the text as you watch away until you fall asleep. It's kind of a cool thing. But yeah, that's kind of my thing this year. I want to do some more reading, and part of that involves maybe a couple of visual novels to mix it up this year. So that's number two, The House in Fata Morgana. Again, goes on sale kind of regularly. Looks like a really fun experience. And again, I've heard good things about the narrative, which a lot of visual novels are kind of hit or miss. So I'm
And you
optimistic
don't
about
know
this one.
until you're 20 hours in.
Yeah, which is so it's been on the backlog for a while. We'll get into it this year and again report back as I get through it some more. So this brings me to your second pick, which is a game that I actually was pretty interested in last year. Played the demo of and enjoyed. Um, but what's number two for you?
Number two for me is the Diofield Chronicle. This was one of those games that came out during that flurry of activity from Square
Mhm.
Enix in the fall. We've talked a little bit about it on the pod, but in the space of like a month or two, Square Enix put out a ton of what I'm calling these second tier releases. So
Yeah,
we had Star Ocean, Harvestella, Crisis Core, Valkyrie Elysium, Dragon Quest Treasures, Tactic Ogre, and then the Diofield Chronicle. And there might even be a few others that I'm missing. I think I got most of them.
pretty much.
But Diofield Chronicle was sort of a budget strategy RPG.
Mhm.
It sort of, just looking at it, reminded me of Fire Emblem Three Houses.
Yeah.
You're going out, you're doing the combat, but then you come back and you're in a castle. You're walking around the castle in like a 3D environment, talking to people, upgrading
Hmm.
equipment, building relationships, things like that. So there was nothing like spectacular about the gameplay here. It was just a solid strategy RPG from everything I've
Yeah.
read. The thing that I'm really excited about, or the thing that really drew me to it, was the character portraits.
Hmm.
Fundamentally
Yeah.
enough, they're these awesome watercolor character portraits that honestly Square Enix might have spent more money on those and the artists than they did on the rest of the game, because the rest of the game looks like it's fine, but
Yeah.
it's not mind blowing or anything. But the portraits and the art look really, really good.
Mhm, mhm. And this, if I recall correctly from the demo, it plays more like a real time strategy game than like a traditional tactics RPG. So this isn't like your Final Fantasy Tactics or your Tactics Ogre. This is more akin to something like a um, like I almost want to say Valkyria Chronicles feels to me like the closest, but even that is a little too stop and go. It almost feels maybe more like a StarCraft or a Warcraft or something like that, only much smaller in scale, right? Because you're individual units, not like swarms of platoons of units and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's a good differentiation there, Matthew, because str- real-time RPGs, strategy RPGs are much different. Like they
Hmm.
feel different, they play
Yeah.
differently, and honestly, it's not a genre that I thought I was going to be into.
Hmm.
So at first, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to play this one. Maybe it's a little too different for me. But just looking at it and playing through the first, I don't know, hour or so, it's really won me
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. This one's been on my like sort of wish list for a deep discount, right? It's one of those ones that Square is going to be by the end of this year. It'll be down to like $20. Snatch it up on sale. Because again, it's one of those ones that I don't feel like I need to experience right away, but feels like
Yep.
it would be perfect to fill in a little gap somewhere in your gaming period. Because I do think it's one that would grip me more than a lot of other games on my backlog, but I'm also in no rush to pick it up.
What's next on your list?
So it, this is my JRPG pick. I'm putting it smack in the middle, right? So that we can talk about it a little bit and then forget about it towards the end. So I can't be accused of talking too much about JRPGs on this podcast, and especially so I can't be held with my feet over the coals for talking about Saga again forever. Because the third game on my list is The Last Remnant Remastered. This is by all accounts a spiritual successor to the Saga series. It was a game that had a pretty troubled development. I think it was PS3 originally, maybe PS4. I can't remember exactly.
I think it
But
was 3, but I could be wrong.
yeah, I think so. I think it was one of those ones that was kind of like when they were really transitioning to a new system, a new engine over at Square Enix. They had this little game that was a lot of the people behind various Saga series games. So it has Akitoshi Kawazu, my favorite JRPG creator. He's here as a writer, but he's not really part of the creative team from a director designer standpoint like he was on every other Saga game, where he typically takes the role of a producer, director, or something like that. And so a lot of his team branched off into this smaller little business group over at Square Enix and put together this very Saga like JRPG. It's a tough as nails JRPG where you play as um, squadrons of soldiers. They're called unions in this game. And so a union is a group of, I think, like 4 to 5 units. And you have, I think, between 3 and 5 unions in your party. And so
Hmm.
when you get into combat, you're actually entering into these big, like 5-on-5, 6-on-6 battles where, behind you, you see armies of enemies, right, that are getting knocked down, kind of like you would see in maybe, like a Fire Emblem or a Advanced Wars or something like that, right? But it plays more as a turn-based RPG. No level ups. You instead gain, stat and skill ups. You spark moves just like you do in Saga games. There's a battle rank that goes up that makes the game harder as you grind more. So it's, you're encouraged to actually use a system where you can basically run around and gather up enemies and fight chains of enemies
Hmm.
using a skill that allows you to link enemies nearby, fight them all at once, and then get huge stat boosts. So you're encouraged to fight harder fights than you're really prepared for, to take on larger units, and you get big stat ups and more skill gain when you do that. So the one thing I know about this is it was notorious for soft locking you late game if you didn't build correctly or tried to grind too much. The game became near impossible in the early versions. Apparently, the remastered fixes this, and it's really hard to soft lock yourself now. The game's a little more forgiving, but it definitely holds the Saga lineage pretty firmly at its center. And so, obviously, as someone who's played pretty much every game in that series, it's naturally the top of my list for games I need to get out in the JRPG genre this year. So that's going to be the big one for me.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's one that I remember, but I never got into. I'm excited to
Hmm.
hear what you think about that
It's
one.
divisive. That's all I know is even people within the Saga community find it a little bit divisive, but we'll see. We'll see.
Is it the difficulty or is it something else?
I think it's a little bit of the difficulty as well as just that it does try some new unique systems that don't necessarily land as well as the more streamlined Saga systems do, because even the Saga systems are pretty obtuse if you're not used to it, but once you know how to play Saga games, it feels pretty intuitive, whereas this is one that you're kind of having to really sink some time into understanding the systems to succeed. So we'll see.
Got it.
We'll see. All right, so this brings us to your number 3. What are we talking about here in the middle of the round?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you played this one before. It's No Man's Sky. I
Mm-hmm.
played it back on the day on the Xbox when it came out, but it was a buggy mess and I
Yeah.
never got very far. I remember just being so frustrated trying to play it because, it was billed as this gigantic open universe, right? Like not
Yeah.
even an open world, it's an open universe. You go to different planets, you mine for resources,
Mhm.
you meet other people that are online playing, and it was just going to be this unbelievable game that never ended, right?
Yeah.
And then it totally flopped. But now they've made the bug fixes. The game is
Mhm.
now, I think, like 2 or 3 years later, finally the game that they said it was going to be on launch.
Right.
And somehow they managed to fit it on a cartridge for the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah. Yeah. I played a little bit of this. I like these kind of immersive sim games, these really big open world kind of survival sim exploration games. I played it late in its, not, I guess, middle of its path at this point, like 2 years ago, I think, right? It's like what, 4 or 5 years old at this point, but I
Is it
played it
really?
about
It
2
might
years ago.
be.
I think so. I think it's really old at this point. But the thing that I've heard is that they just keep adding all these free updates, and
Hmm.
sometimes these free updates are as big as what would be like a paid DLC, of $20 to $40 for other games they're giving out for free to their users. And I've heard that the team over there at Hello Games, right, is the
Yep.
team
That's
behind
all
this,
games.
has really, I think, other than Final Fantasy 14, I don't know of another game that has had such a renaissance as No Man's Sky. It seems like largely they went from, mostly negative to negative reviews on Steam to nearing, very to overwhelmingly positive reviews in recent months. So it's one that I've wanted to kind of dive back into, and mostly one that, seems to me like a really good multiplayer game.
Hmm.
So maybe
And
we'll talk about getting in and playing some of that together, because I do want to check it back out. But
well,
yeah.
unfortunately, I don't think that the Nintendo version has multiplayer. I think that's one of
Okay.
the things they trimmed out. I'm not sure. You all will let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about that. But I don't think that it has it. That was one of the things that had to
Interesting.
get jettisoned. But a game like this, the only way I'm going to get any sort of progress in a game like this is if I have it handheld.
Yeah.
Talked about it a little bit more with that visual novel just now for a different reason a few minutes ago. But a game like No Man's Sky that's truly engrossing, that's going to take hour after hour after hour,
Hmm.
it's got to be handheld. And putting it on the Switch, I can't believe it's there. But it's probably the only way I would ever dive back into
Yeah.
this because it's such a commitment. It's a time commitment.
Hmm.
It's a physical space commitment. I'm just not good at those very much anymore. Sitting in front of
Yeah.
a TV for a dozen hours or so.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how this one goes for you, because again, a lot of the people I know that play it or have played it find the most enjoyment out of it from the multiplayer and things like that. So I'm curious to see how it goes, doing it largely solo. So we'll look at that. Maybe if there is multiplayer, we'll try to get together and do a little bit. But I've heard good things. Regardless, I think it's going to be a really cool experience.
Yeah, hope so. So, what is your fourth game?
Fourth pick. So this is a genre that I've not played in a very long time. I grew up actually being a really big fan of a little series called Armored Core, which is old school from soft game. Big mech action. You build your own mechs and pilot them on these missions. Another game that I really, really love is Zone of the Enders Second Runner, which some people might remember from Konami's heyday back in, I believe, the PS2 is when that game came out. And I've always been a fan of, mecha anime as well. Grew up as a Toonami kid back in the late 90s, early 2000s, watching Gundam Wing and all the different Gundam series that came out there. And my pick for number 4 is a little game called Daemon X Machina, which was a Switch game that came out a few years back, well, quite a few years back at this point. Didn't
I think it was
have the
one of the
best
first
reception.
games.
It was early. Yeah, it was early. It didn't have the best reception, but I've heard that there's been a bit of a reassessment of it
Hmm.
since release. Like, it had some performance issues and things like that. I think a lot of that got hammered out. It's still kind of a more bare bones than like an Armored Core, but you do get to build your own mech. You go on these story missions. Apparently, the story is just incomprehensible nonsense, and that's fine, right?
So
That's not what
anime
I'm in it for.
goodness.
Yeah, I just want to build a mech, pilot it, and blow shit up. And apparently, that's what you get with this game. I actually really like the aesthetic. It's got kind of like a cell shady, very vibrant, anime aesthetic to it that I think works really well for these kinds of games. And I'm thinking about getting a hold of, I think is it Hori that makes a big chunky controller
Yep.
for the Switch, right? That was designed specifically for this game. And people have said that if you have, large hands and the little Joy Cons are hard for you, that this is like the most comfortable way to play handheld Switch is to use the controller that they built for, that they released specifically for this game. So I'm thinking about maybe getting a hold of that and jumping through the game with those, beefy boys strapped to the Switch. But yeah, I don't know a ton about this other than it's in the same vein of, the Armored Core series and stuff like that. Independent missions, building your own mech between battles, repairs, all that kind of stuff, and a sort of incomprehensible story. So,
That's
um,
about what I know about it too.
yeah,
But I picked this one up a few months ago on
nice.
eBay for like $5.
It's not bad.
And I've been so excited to play it. I actually have that Hori
Oh, that's
gamepad,
pretty cool.
and I mean, you've got a Steam Deck. It feels a lot like a Steam Deck in that,
Hmm.
so it's pretty comfortable, but it's beefy for sure.
Yeah,
But I've been so looking forward to this game. I hadn't had a chance to play it yet. If it wasn't on your list, it was going to be on mine.
nice.
This is also a Nintendo published game.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Which again, kind of one of those ones that just kind of, didn't have the best reception at launch, and I think that really did it under with the performance issues and stuff. But again, I've heard from people, especially fans of games like Armored Core. They say if you like it, this is a nice Armored Core light. Um, and
Hmm.
with Armored Core 6, announced last year, late last year, um, I'm itching for something in the genre, and I figure now's the time. I picked it up for a couple bucks on sale. I'm gonna get through it. I'm gonna play it, and I'm very excited for it. Maybe we'll get a group play together since it's on your list as well. Do a pod and maybe stream it a little bit while we're playing.
We should do that. This is, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's going to be one of the games that when the Switch's lifespan is over, people are going to be looking for this game,
Yeah.
right? I
I
think
think it's cool.
it's cool. It's first party published game, and right now, I mean, we're getting the Armored Core remasters, but
Mhm.
we're not here yet. This is a good holdover until that point.
Yeah.
All right, fourth game on my list, NieR Automata.
Nice.
I know.
Yes.
I thought late last year I was going to have no trouble getting to this game. I was so excited for it, and then Persona 5 Royal
Yep.
happened, and Pokemon Scarlet happened, and I haven't even touched it yet, Matthew. Haven't even downloaded the patches yet. Like it has, I don't think it's even been in my Switch yet.
That's a bummer. It's a bummer. It's a gem. It's a gem of a game. We're definitely gonna have a conversation about this one. It's a favorite of mine, favorite series of mine, favorite. One of my favorite creative teams behind it. Probably the best composer working right now out there in the NieR series. So do you know a lot about this game, or are you kind of going in blind? Because I know we've talked a little bit about, but I've been pretty clear to try to kind of steer away from spoilers and things
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
I'm going in pretty much blind. I have a very vague understanding of the plot,
Hmm.
but I've been trying to stay away from mainly detailed reviews. Like I've read that
Yeah,
it's an impossible port on the Switch, and that's awesome. So I'm excited about that, being able to play it and getting like
yeah,
the fullest from it. You're getting the additional DLC on the Switch port as well. But as far as like the detailed points of the plot, no idea what's going on. I know it's
yeah.
an action RPG.
The big thing to remember is in order to get the most out of it, you really do need to see at least four endings to this game without spoiling anything, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that's just kind of what you need to do. You need to commit yourself to four playthroughs. Again, I'm not saying there's systems in place to make it so it's not four playthroughs, the same length each time, but it's something you need to commit
Let
to
me ask you
see
this.
the most out of it.
Is it a game that you need to play through four different times? Like completely, or is it a game you play through one time and then you go on YouTube and look up the other endings? Like, is it worth
No,
experiencing? I guess that's
no,
the
you
question.
you play it. You play it. You gotta play it. Looking it up is doing a huge disservice. But like I said, the first playthrough is going to be your longest playthrough. The second playthrough is going to be about half the length of that, and then the next two will be significantly shorter than even that.
How long are we
So there's
talking for a playthrough? Is it like 20 hours, 30 hours?
16 to 20. I think you can get through the 4 playthroughs in under the length of time it would take you to get through a modern Final Fantasy.
Okay.
So that's the only thing. Is like, don't get distracted by the fact that you've rolled credits. Do yourself a favor and get in there and at least see through ending D. They're alphabetized. There's 26 endings in the game, I believe. I don't. There might actually be like a double A or something like that, but there's at least 26 endings in the game. Most of them are like joke endings and little things that could happen. Like, for example, without this isn't really a spoiler, but there's a fish at one point. If you eat the fish, you die, and you get an ending, right? So like little things like that can be endings, and you just go right back into the game and continue. But there are 4 endings that are worth seeing to the end,
And
and
this is one of your favorite games, like of all time, right?
it's definitely up there. It's one that I've been itching to replay. Once they released the Switch port, I've seriously considered jumping back in and doing it again because I've heard that the Switch port plays very, very well, but I just haven't done it yet. But yeah, when it first came out on the PS4, I picked it up day one, played through it in about a week. I did all the endings, so it's worth checking out. It's a great game. I think it's again another one that's kind of divisive. Some people really like it, some people couldn't care less about it. But if the first playthrough grips you, I think it's absolutely worth seeing through to the climax. So yeah,
Yeah,
great
we'll do a
series,
pod
great
on it
game.
eventually.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Brings me to my last item on the list. Right, we're coming up to the end of this episode. We're coming up to the end of our lists here, and this is a little one that I've heard some rumblings about over the last 2 years or so. It stuck out to me as something that was kind of right up my alley, but I just didn't know about it when it came out, so it kind of passed me by. I heard about it, someone talking about it on a podcast recently, and decided to check it out when it was on sale. So I own it now, and I moved it pretty quickly towards the top of my list, and that is a game called F.I.S.T. This is an acronym for Forged in Shadow Torch. This is I believe, a small development team. It might be a Chinese development team, if I recall correctly. I might be getting that wrong, so don't hold me to any of that. But it is a Metroidvania in which you play as an anthropomorphized rabbit who has a big mechanical gauntlet on his arm.
Oh, I know this game. Yeah, I've seen it. I've never played it.
I've purposely not tried to look too much into it. I hear it's relatively short. I hear it plays like a really good Metroidvania, and I hear that most importantly, what it does and does well is, unlike a lot of Metroidvanias where the sort of like on ramping can be a little bit slow. In a Metroid game, you might spend an hour before you get some of the more impressive skills or abilities, or it might be 2-3 hours into the game before you can access certain locations because of an ability you need. And this game kind of apparently really gets you into the thick of things pretty quick. It doesn't hold back a
Hmm.
lot of abilities early on. It gives you access to a large portion of your ability pool from the start. So it lets you just kind of get in and get going and learn as you play, which I think is a really cool approach to a Metroidvania game, is to give you, half or more of your tool set right out the gate and say, go for it. Right. So I've heard that this game does something similar to that, or at least feels a little bit snappier, a little quicker to the jump than a lot of Metroidvanias tend to do, especially smaller Metroidvanias, more indie experiences, which I find tend to lack the sharp pacing of like a Castlevania or a Metroid a lot of the time. So um, I'm excited for it. Again, I don't know a lot about it. I tried to purposely kind of steer clear because I know it's like a relatively short game, but it looks fun. I've heard it plays really well and controls really well. And whenever I'm looking for a Metroidvania, I want something that just feels fun to play. So I'm hoping this will be a good one, but who knows? Could be a total whiff.
Well, the thing about the Metroidvania is, at least pretty early. if I'm gonna like this or I'm gonna bounce off.
That's true. Yeah.
And the whole gameplay, maybe you've got 10, 12 hours into it and then you're out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it. More short experiences, right? That's kind of my motto for this year is I'm trying to play through a lot of games that I can get through in, a weekend or a couple weekends or something like that. I play too many games that are, 30, 40 plus hours. I want some more, tight 5 to 10 hour experiences this year.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, this brings us to your last item, which is one that I have never heard of, know nothing about, and I'm very curious to hear you, explain to me a little bit. So, what is your fifth pick for the backlog breakdown this year?
Well, Matthew, I know very little about it too. This was a late ad. So we're going to learn about this one together. It's called Chicken Police. Paint it red. Got it right here. Never opened
Oh, so
it.
you're holding a copy of it. You have a physical copy
I
of a
do.
game called Chicken Police.
How could you not? Rated M for mature.
Okay.
9 out of 10 Nintendo Life, 90 out of 100
Really?
Game Space, 90 out of 100 Cube 3. Yeah.
I'm looking at pictures right now, and I've never heard of this, and this is bonkers.
So it's
Where
2021 THQ Nordic.
Okay.
It's a
Oh, yeah, they're a fun studio. You never know
yeah.
what you're getting with THQ Nordic.
So it's a buddy cop noir adventure where you play as a rooster who is trying to solve a mystery. This is
Sure, as you do.
all right. So this was a complete blind buy for me. I went into GameStop and this was last year. I was buying like the new Kirby game and something else,
Yeah.
and I was buying those two at full price. So it was like a buy two get one free deal. I was already buying, I think, Rune Factory and Kirby. So you're like,
Okay.
oh, you get a free one along with this. Which one do you want? So I was looking around and I was kind of looking for something a little offbeat, and
Yeah.
came up with this: a wild tale of love, death, chickens, and redemption. Matthew. Apparently, it's a crazy, this over the top detective story, but the entire thing is voice acted. It's got,
Okay, well, that's nice.
cut scenes, voice acting, whole thing. It looks so bizarre, and I totally forgot it was on my shelf until I started looking for another one to replace a JRPG I had in that section.
Okay.
Really stoked about it. Apparently, the humor is just like sort of absurd, but it's really heavy into that noir aesthetic and
Yeah.
wears it on its sleeve. So, a couple things I want to ask you what you think about this game. You've looked at it in like the 30 seconds that I've been talking.
Yeah.
Second thing, when was the last time you had a blind buy?
So first, I'm gonna probably end up playing Chicken Police now. This looks incredibly stupid, but in like a good way. So
Mhm.
if the narrative is any good, if you can give it a thumbs up at the end of this list, and once you've completed it, I may borrow it from you and check it out as well. Because again, like I said, I'm always looking for visual novels, and sometimes I like to mix it up. A serious visual novel here, a comedy visual novel there. Interesting. Now, as far as blind buys go, what are we talking here? Are we talking just completely, I know literally nothing about it, or are we talking about, I've heard someone say something about it, but I'm just trusting word of mouth?
No, I mean, like, I've never heard of this game before, but it's on sale at the eShop, or it was a buy two get one deal at GameStop. You know nothing about it. Maybe you've seen the title before, but you don't know anything about it.
I I don't know that. I'm trying to check my. So usually this is what happens with my purchases on Steam, right? Like this is kind of a thing that I do with Steam sales, right? I'll go through the Steam sales, and a game I've never heard of, I'll snag it if it sounds interesting to me, right?
Yeah, because they go on sale for like $1.
Yeah, like nothing. And so I'm looking at my list right now. And the last time I did something like that looks like it was a year and a half ago. when I picked up an early access game on Steam called Dread Delusion, which looks like a really low poly old school Morrowind, and
Hmm.
plays kind of like a really dumbed down
Low
Morrowind.
poly.
But it's a lot of fun. But that was the last time I've done that, and I typically don't do that. I have a bit of a bad habit of reading too many reviews and opinions on games before I purchase them. Typically I won't pick up a game unless I've heard something positive about it from some corner of the internet. But yeah, from time to time I'll kind of browse what's in early access or recently released and maybe pick something up on a Steam sale.
All right. All right.
Though I will say I didn't know anything about Citizen Sleeper when that came out last year, around May. I saw a screenshot of it and I said, "This is the game that's for me." Picked it up, ended up being one of my top games of last year. So it's not, it's not entirely unheard of for me to do that.
Yeah, and you have
Typically, the
one of the first reviews I saw of Citizen Sleeper. You had written it.
yeah,
You were early
I
on
I,
it.
I picked that up. Again, I saw. I wish listed it a couple months before it came out because I saw some screenshots of it as I was browsing just different, what's coming, upcoming games, and it looked exactly like something I wanted. I wanted to check out, and so I did. Another game that turned out to be just huge that I picked up without any prior knowledge was Disco Elysium.
Oh yeah.
So typically that tends to be the genre that I'm most likely to do it. Really narrative heavy, visual novel esque games tend to be the ones where I don't really read a lot. I just kind of look, does the aesthetic look interesting? Does the narrative hook sound compelling? Okay, let's pick it up. Right.
Yeah, well,
That's
you
kind of
don't
where
have
I
a
go.
lot of people playing those games. The
Hmm.
big review sites, you don't really have a lot of people playing those games or reviewing those games. They take a
Or they,
long time.
yeah, or the tail is, they pick up in the tail end of things where a few months down the line, word of mouth has buzzed it enough that a big outlet picks it up. But that's kind of where most of my impulse picks come from. But I've never walked into a store that I can think of and just looked at us. I do that with books, but not with games typically.
Well, I will let you know about this one. I can't wait to play it. It's been on my shelf and I forgot about it until you vetoed one of my other picks. So I'm happy
Good.
to
I'm
have
glad I'm
this
forcing
one
you into it.
back on my radar. All right, so the entire podcast has been a recommendations pod.
Yep.
So let's skip our games of the week. We've got 10 games for you to pick from. More
Yeah.
than enough. More
Check
than
them
enough.
out.
And a lot of the games that we've got listed here are discount titles. So really no excuse. No excuse.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think any of these are picked up for more than, $20 on discount. If you keep an eye out, they are all, from what we've heard, good, compelling, interesting games. There's a reason they're on our backlog, and our most anticipated games to knock off this year. So please, let us know if you're interested in any of these games, if they're ones that you've played before, if they're ones that are on your backlog. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with them or your interest in them. Let's, continue this conversation going through 2023. We'll check in with these games every now and then. Um, Happy to chat with you guys about them as well.
Yep. So what's on your backlog? Let us know in the comments or tweet at us. Matthews at Zero Parts. I am at Puffy Red Shirt. So, just a quick reminder in case you missed our last pod, we are planning on doing a Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster playthrough. So,
Yes.
if you want to play through them with us, if you want to be a guest, tweet at us. Let us know. We're going to go through every single mainline Final Fantasy game, but starting with those Pixel Remasters that are going to be landing
Yeah.
on the Switch a little later this year.
And
So,
I think our plan, we haven't super narrowed this down, but I think our plan is to cover Final Fantasy 1 and 2 relatively close together, if not on the same episode. So we'll be talking about Final Fantasy 1 and 2 sometime in February. The exact details of that will come a little bit later. But if you're interested, hop into those games, check them out, give them a couple hours of your time. They're pretty quick experiences, but we're going to be talking about those just in a few weeks here. So please, if you're a fan of those games, you wanted to come chat with us on the pod, let us know.
yep, for sure. With that, Matthew, thanks, man.
Take it
Always
easy,
awesome
Justin.
to talk to you. And thank you for listening, for subscribing, and we'll be back in your podcast feed next week.
See you guys then.